Max had set up this luncheon at 21, I believe it was, for Reagan and all these people so that they could meet Reagan. And Nancy Reagan was coming with him, but she didn't know anybody in New York. And I was asked if I would do something with her, just while the men were busy. I knew that she was active in a program called Foster Grandparents, something I had never heard of. But also, Max was so convinced that Reagan would not only get the nomination, but would win the election, that I said to him, if she becomes First Lady, she is going to have a very powerful voice. I was very much involved in a drug rehabilitation project here run by Monsignor O'Brien. It was called Daytop Village. I said to Max, why don't I ask her if she would like to go to meet Monsignor O'Brien and some of the people who are in the project, because she will have a tremendous voice in drug rehabilitation if she's the First Lady. So I asked if she would like to do that, and she said yes. Daytop Village was on West 40th Street, but the rehabilitation center was at Swan Lake, upstate. Monsignor O'Brien thought it would be a great idea. He brought about 100 of the people who were in rehabilitation to 40th Street. I asked Max to come, and he came and he sat with me and with Nancy and Monsignor O'Brien at a table in a huge room, and all of the those in rehab were seated on the floor in front of us. And Nancy said, I can't sit here. I'm going to go down so that I can really talk to them. I want to be with them. So she went down on the floor among all these kids, asked them why they had gone into drugs, what the program was doing for them, how successful they were, and all kinds of questions. Were their parents involved? Were their parents taking drugs? And one of them got up and talked about her parents and said, they are taking drugs. And that's how I started. And this program has been wonderful for me. And Nancy said, well, what about your parents? Are they going into rehab? And she said, no, they're too old for something like this. How old are your parents? They're in their 40s. Well, Nancy and I were a little bit beyond 40. Anyway, it was very, very successful. No publicity because Nancy wasn't known, and nobody really, the press was not interested. So we left. Max had this very successful luncheon. And then when he was nominated, after the convention, Nancy called me and she said, I would like to come back. I'd like to visit the center again and talk to the children. And so I set that up again. Now the press was interested, and they all came in droves, and it was a very, very successful meeting. She really related to the kids. The New York Post had centerfold pictures of her. All the papers covered it, and that was great. Then he was elected. Max and I were in the country, and Nancy called me again after he'd been elected president and said, I'd like to come back, and I'd like to talk to Monsignor O'Brien, and I'd like to see the people who are in rehabilitation. But we couldn't arrange it. Between us, we just couldn't arrange to be in New York at the same time. We were invited to the first luncheon that the Reagans gave at the White House after he was elected, after he took office. And I sat next to Jim Baker, who had been named Chief of Staff. And I told Jim about this, and I said, I think it would be a terrific idea to, now that Nancy has seen what's going on in drug rehabilitation, and it's such a terrible problem, it would be nice if she could bring this into the White House and do something out of the White House to work in this program. And he said, why don't you send me a letter to that effect? Which I did. And that started the whole thing going. This is very interesting. 8 years later, Max and I were in Washington at the Jefferson Hotel shortly before we were going to return here. Nancy called me and she said, I'm going through the papers. They've been sent up from the basement, and I found this letter from you to Jim Baker about drug rehabilitation or something. I don't understand it. I said, I didn't write Jim. I said, I haven't written him I said, I've never written him. She said, well, I don't understand it, but here is this letter. So I said, Nancy, send me a copy of it. So she sent it over by messenger immediately, and it was dated 1981. I called her back. I said, Nancy, you didn't look at the date. I sent this letter to Jim in 1981, and that was it. And I have that letter in my files in the basement someplace. I have to look for it. But it was really very interesting because that was the proof that I had started the whole thing. And that's really what made her, because she had all these problems with the dishes and with the clothes. She got involved in the drug rehab because of me. But that story has never been told.